Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a trip into the complex, beautiful, and often terrifying consciousness of electronic music's greatest enigma, Richard D. James.
An artist most people know as Aphex Twin.
Exactly. And it's a dive into someone who, really from his very first releases, made music that felt less like traditional composition.
Less verse, chorus, verse, yeah.
Right. It was more like the actual dreams of a sophisticated, maybe even isolated machine.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it. This is a fundamental investigation into the relationship between sound, technology, and our own perception. A relationship that's always shifting and sometimes, well, it feels almost adversarial.
That dynamic, that's the core conflict we're tracing today. It defines his entire career. So our deep dive is really built around a critical comparison. His early work was famously described as an electronic dream. It was this fascinating, sometimes abrasive place where mechanical dreams and human illusion met the warm, messy world of analog circuits.
But if you fast forward to today, his music is dealing with something colder, something far more refined. It's this highly evolved, almost AI-like structure.
And yet, paradoxically, he's also engaging in this sort of return to nostalgia at the same time. He's filtering all that computational complexity through a historical lens.
That's the tension. Analog violence versus AI precision.
And that's the engine for this whole journey. We've structured this deep dive across 4 axes to really get to the bottom of it. His work, the technology, his aesthetics, and maybe most importantly, the philosophy that's driving all of it.
And the stakes here they're incredibly high, especially if you're interested in the future of music and art. This isn't just about him upgrading his gear, moving from a tape machine to a laptop.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's about charting the moment when music stopped just trying to mimic human emotions, sadness, joy, whatever, and started actively exploring the fuzzy, unstable boundaries between our own messy human perception and a purely computational, almost inhuman structure.
Okay, let's unpack this journey into the mind of electronic music's most enduring enigma. Our mission is to understand how he went from the glorious accidents of analog violence to the surgical precision of AI structures.
And how in doing that, he defined and then just completely transcended the limits of electronic music for really a whole generation of artists.
When we talk about Aphex Twin's beginning, we have to start with the foundational text, the one that just changed the entire landscape of electronic listening. Selected Ambient Works 8592.
Released in 92.
Right. And it immediately set a new benchmark. It created a new vocabulary for the whole genre, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was a genuine fork in the road for electronic music history. And that title is so important, 85 to 92. It implies a retrospective, like he's archiving the earliest thoughts of this new electronic consciousness.
A collection of experiments.
Exactly. And before this album, ambient music. I mean, it functioned exactly as the name suggests. It was background, atmospheric filler, sound designed to be ignored.
Richard D. James completely changed that.
He fundamentally changed its utility.
And he did it with sonic components that, on paper, they should have sounded cold, sterile even.
What are we talking about specifically?
Well, you have the almost monotonous metronomic repetition of the sequencer, but it's combined with this soft, almost breathy oscillation from those early analog synthesizers.
And it creates this strange, almost unsettling warmth. It's like the machines are whispering secrets to you.
That warmth is the genius, isn't it? The key insight our deep dive uncovered is that even though the sound was purely electronic, you could still hear what our sources call the human breath on the other side of the circuitry.
He wasn't just programming notes into a grid, he was organizing an entire environment for you, the listener, to occupy, a space that felt lived in, but also maybe a little hostile.
And that's why his philosophical approach was so interesting. He wasn't trying to just compose melodies in a classical sense. His goal was to organize an environment.
So when you listen to a track like X-Doll,
you're not just hearing a song, you're occupying a specific, highly detailed auditory room.
And that's the crucial distinction from the ambient pioneers who came before him, most notably someone like Brian Eno.
Right. Eno's work was often about generative atmosphere, music as furniture almost, designed to blend in, reduce anxiety.
Aphex Twin took that blueprint and injected something far more volatile into it. His ambient poetry carried a more personal and destructive emotion, even while it had this propulsive, almost hypnotic club-like intensity.
Wait, destructive emotion in ambient music? It sounds like an oxymoron. Ambient is supposed to be passive, isn't it?
It is, traditionally, but he completely subverts that expectation. The destructive part comes from this rhythmic anxiety, these subtle, unsettling shifts. The sheer length of the tracks often builds a sense of impending dread, not relaxation.
So it's ambient that puts you on edge.
Exactly. It makes you feel uneasy, not just comfortable. It's the sound of memory being processed in a highly anxious state. And we have a quote from him back in 1993 where he defined this tension perfectly. He said, "Ambient is memory lingering in the air."
That's incredible. That encapsulates the entire conflict.
It does. The soft, warm synths are the memory, and the cold, rigorous, repetitive structure is the lingering, almost haunting effect. So if selected ambient works was the emotional and structural blueprint, his early EPs, I'm thinking of classics and the analog Bubble Bath series, they provided the raw materials, the messy stuff.
Right. The early works from 91 to 93, they were completely defined by the technical limitations of the hardware he had at the time.
And those limitations became the heart of his aesthetic. What kind of gear are we talking about here that defined that early raw sound?
Well, the sources point to a few key machines that were crucial and famously notoriously erratic. You have the Roland TV303 bass synth.
The acid sounds.
Of course. Then the SH-101 monosynth and the Akai S950 sampler. The crucial thing is these were machines designed for functional dance music, but he pushed them way past what they were ever intended to do.
Okay, the 303 is legendary for that squelch, but the sampler. How did the Akai S950 define his sound?
The S950 was essential for this era. It was a 12-bit sampler, so it had very limited fidelity. And its internal memory was tiny. We're talking a few seconds of sound, maybe?
So that forces a certain kind of workflow.
It forces aggressive, rapid-fire chopping and looping. You couldn't load a long, pristine sample. You had to manipulate these tiny, short snippets of sound over and over, and often pretty brutally. This constraint led to what we call manual errors, or hardware-induced noise.
So the hardware's limitations forced him into a unique approach. It wasn't just a creative choice. It was a conversation with the machine's own flaws.
Precisely. That unique slide and squelch of the 303, the aggressive low-res looping of the S950, these machines encouraged a hands-on physical process. And it was these physical constraints and the errors they produced that determined his whole sonic aesthetic.
So if a sample didn't loop cleanly,
he didn't fix it.
Yeah.
He amplified the jagged edge.
This sounds like the exact moment we see the birth of IDM, intelligent dance music. He was already playing with microgranulation, that quick flickering sound, the glitch, and these intensely irregular tempo shifts.
So why intelligent? Why did that label stick?
Well, it got that label because it moved beyond the purely utilitarian four-on-the-floor kick drum of house or techno. IDM was built on this idea of controlled chaos, rhythmic abstraction. The intelligence wasn't about being smarter than the listener. It was about the music demanding more from you. It demanded intellectual and perceptual effort.
You couldn't just dance to it mindlessly.
No, you had to actively listen to its structure.
And this brings us to this really visceral concept of analog violence.
Yes, this music was an experiment in pushing the corporeality of sound to its absolute extreme. It felt physical, distorted, tactile. The machine's own internal noise, the hum from the circuitry, the buzz, the unintended glitch from a sampler struggling to keep up, that became the rhythm.
So the errors weren't thrown away.
They were consciously transformed into an aesthetic of construction. He embraced the imperfections of the analog process, weaponizing noise and distortion until the sound had this palpable, aggressive texture.
To really get a handle on his evolution, we need to understand the physical data of the sound itself. Our technical analysis of this early period uses a track like Xtal from 1992 as a benchmark.
And if you were to look at a conceptual spectrogram of Xtal, which is just a visualization of frequency and intensity, it's characterized by what we call soft sound pressure concentrated in the mid-low range.
It has a cushioned quality, dense, but not sharp.
I think we need an analogy here for listeners who aren't staring at spectrograms every day. What does soft sound pressure concentrated in the mid-low range actually sound like?
Okay, imagine listening to music that's beautiful, but the very high end, the crystal clarity of cymbals, the sharp detail, and the very deep sub-bass are a little bit muffled.
So it's warm and enveloping.
Exactly, almost like you're listening through a thick wool blanket.
And that makes perfect sense. The frequency range reflects the limitations of the technology he was working with at the time.
It does. The average range was pretty narrow, usually sitting between about 80 hertz and 8 kilohertz. This was dominated by analog recording methods, the limitations of tape, early digital converters, you just couldn't capture or reproduce those extreme highs and lows cleanly back then.
So the sonic weight was concentrated right where that analog warmth lives.
Correct. The focus was heavily on low-frequency dominance, mainly between 60 and 400 hertz. That's the realm of analog warmth, gentle distortion, the main body of the bass. The conceptual waveform of this period shows short, repeating phrases and a weak, high-pass sub-bass.
The bass is there, but it's more of a gentle vibration than an earthquake.
Yes, it lacks the intense clarity and separation we just take for granted in modern digital production. And this wasn't necessarily a choice of refusal yet, it was just the reality of the gear, which he then molded into a defining aesthetic. Okay, so now we move to the middle of the decade. This is a real pivot point where Aphex Twin didn't just expand his sound, he fundamentally solidified his presence as a distinct artistic author.
And the crucial shift here is the 1996 release, the Richard D. James album.
That's a huge moment. By using his own name, he's explicitly defining his authorship. He's putting a face, literally and figuratively, to the noise.
He stops being just this anonymous sound organizer working in the ambient shadows and becomes a sonic architect, kind of mad scientist working in rhythm.
And the sound itself is a massive, almost impossible leap in rhythmic complexity compared to his earlier work.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources describe this album as sound sculpture. It's created by literally fragmenting and reconstructing breakbeats to the very limits of what's possible. It no longer sounds like a drum machine or a drummer.
It sounds like rhythm being shattered and reassembled at a molecular level, piece by piece, under a microscope.
It's an exercise in detailing complexity within what we might call the quarter beat world. And think about that level of precision. A typical measure is divided into 16 notes. He's operating in subdivisions of that.
So drums are jumping erratically, sampled strings are just severed instantly, voices are pulverized into these tiny microparticles.
The rhythmic complexity is dizzying. It gives the music this manic, hyperactive energy.
And here's the technical marvel that still just amazes audio engineers today. This level of DNA-level composition, this rhythmic sophistication, was achieved in a largely pre-modern DAW environment.
We're talking 1996.
Yeah, we didn't have the simple drag-and-drop sequencing and auto-quantization that we use now.
That is the critical point that has to be emphasized. He was starting to use early digital tools. Sure, rudimentary sequencers, maybe even early Pro Tools for surgical editing. But the sheer complexity of it still relied so heavily on hardware manipulation, intricate MIDI programming, manually slicing samples on hard drives.
How did he physically manage that level of detail without going completely mad? I mean, it must have been excruciatingly laborious.
It was basically audio forensics mixed with obsessive data entry. He treated the early Pro Tools environment not as a creative canvas, but as a surgical suite.
So you take a 2-second drum loop,
zoom into the millisecond, and manually shift individual drum hits by these tiny increments, creating what sounded like impossible rhythms. The gear map shows the shift. He's moving away from purely accidental analog noises to more powerful samplers and sequencers that let him control the chaos, not just submit to it.
So he used these new tools not for simplicity, but for maximum structural complexity.
Exactly.
This intense technical evolution then coincided with a massive leap into the mainstream consciousness, though, as you said, always on his own, highly unsettling terms.
Right, through the iconic collaborations with the director Chris Cunningham from 1997 to 99.
This is where the sound fused with cinematic terror. The videos for Come to Daddy and especially Window Licker are they're seminal, not just in music video history, but in popular culture.
Cunningham successfully translated the music's underlying electronic instability into visual abnormality and, well, outright body horror.
It was a perfect, disturbing feedback loop, wasn't it? The music was already unstable, full of these jarring cuts and speed shifts, and then Cunningham gave that instability a face.
Richard D. James's own unsettling smile.
Superimposed onto a cast of women in the Window Licker video. That juxtaposition was a stroke of absolute subversive genius.
The visual element made the music inescapable. Come to Daddy was pure, raw aggression, a parody of heavy metal tropes.
Yeah.
But Window Licker was surgical, unsettling, and highly satirical. It took the typical hip-hop video glamour and twisted it into something bizarre and disturbing.
And that cinematic exposure created this huge paradox for an artist who'd previously been deep in the underground. Suddenly, MTV is celebrating him as the strangest genius.
And that visibility was the very thing he was satirizing. The source material suggested this mass exposure made him acutely aware of the danger of his music being absorbed into mass culture and just sanitized.
Once the media labels you a genius, they try to explain you away.
Right. They reduce complex art to a digestible narrative. And James fought tooth and nail against that, using his fame to amplify his critique.
Which leads us directly to the deeper philosophical layer of this era. His activity became a constant, sustained meta-critique of the music industry.
Absolutely. Everything he did became symbolic, self-aware satire. That now iconic laughing face logo that started appearing everywhere. That's not just quirky branding.
No, it's a direct mocking satire of the traditional artist myth.
Exactly. The idea of the sensitive, tortured, emotionally available genius that the industry loves to package and sell, he was literally laughing at the public's need to categorize and idolize the creator.
And think about the track titles. They become increasingly opaque during this period. Intentionally cryptic names that refer to obscure gear or technical processes.
That intentional inscrutability asserts what we call the right of sound to refuse meaning. In an industry obsessed with lyrics and narrative, he was demanding that you, the listener, focus purely on the vibration, the rhythm, the texture.
He was ensuring the music couldn't be easily commodified or explained away in a neat little review.
The focus remained purely on your direct engagement with the sound, detached from the typical pop star narrative. It's a radically anti-marketing stance.
So he's saying, listen to the noise, not the man behind the noise.
Exactly. And that refusal to submit to a narrative kept him a foreign object, a concept we'll definitely come back to. He used the very systems that wanted to absorb him, MTV, major labels, to critique their core assumptions about what an artist should even be.
So after that mid-career explosion and the intense, almost frenetic complexity of the 2001 album Drooks, Richard D. James entered what became known as the Great Silence.
13 years without a major studio album.
Yeah, and given his hyper-productivity before that, this silence just created a void. It was filled with rumors, speculation, and immense expectation.
So his eventual return in 2014 with Zero marked the beginning of his current, highly sophisticated digital maturity.
And Zero was maybe the most anticipated electronic album of the 21st century. But it wasn't a simple, nostalgic return to the 90s sound, was it?
No, not at all. It was something profoundly new. The album is like a technical archive. It's a meticulous fusion of what we call analog regression, bringing back those warm, messy sounds, and intensely sophisticated digital editing and mastering.
It felt like he took the best lessons from all his previous eras and just integrated them into this hyper-detailed whole.
I think the defining technical feature of Syro wasn't even the music itself, but the meticulous technical transparency.
You mean the track list notes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every track provided detailed credit for all the instruments and processing chains he used, the synths, the compressors, the outboard gear, everything. Why was that such a significant, even disruptive statement?
Well, it was a monumental philosophical statement. It asserted that every sound possesses a technical history. He was demystifying the process while simultaneously elevating it.
In an age where music production is increasingly opaque, a black box hidden inside a laptop, he forces you to acknowledge that what you're hearing is constructed, it's engineered, it's traceable.
But wait, if he's giving credit for every single piece of gear, doesn't that make the music feel colder? More sterile? What was the goal of being that transparent?
For the critical listener, it actually achieves the opposite. Instead of feeling cold, it makes the experience hyper-real and deeply technical. It moves the focus away from a romanticized emotion to what we term the sensation of data.
The emotion is still there, but it's generated by the data.
Precisely. The music transforms from simple sound into a highly organized body of information. He's basically saying the magic isn't magic, it's engineering, and here is the blueprint.
That distinction emotion versus the sensation of data is absolutely crucial for understanding his current work. He's no longer chasing a mood or a groove.
He's mapping a computational structure that is so intricate and precise that it can evoke or simulate a mood in the listener.
And this push towards structured information just fully blossoms 4 years later with the 2018 Collapse EP.
Yes. Analysts identify this work as an explicit, sustained experiment in embedding highly complex, human-like emotion and texture within a purely algorithmic structure.
And technically, the complexity just increases exponentially here. We hear wildly complex time signatures like 54/78, sometimes shifting every few bars.
Discontinuous rhythms that feel fractured, and sound processing that deals with intense three-dimensional space. Everything feels like it's rotating on multiple axes at once.
The sound particles literally self-develop like an AI's thought process. What's an easy way to grasp that audibly?
The easiest way is that the rhythms feel like they are thinking. Like tiny fragments of sound are organizing themselves instantly, too fast for any human to truly follow or predict. The flow is non-linear, it's inhuman. It reflects a logic that transcends human intuitive composition,
It sounds like information overload becoming rhythm.
where the structure is so dense it starts to feel liquid. Yes.
If the early work was about controlling the glorious accident of analog error, this work feels like controlling infinity. The complexity is the key.
That's the perfect distinction. And the complexity here isn't about showing off. It's about exploring the limits of non-human structural organization. Where human composers tend towards symmetry and repetition 4 and 8 bar loops, algorithms inherently seek maximal variation.
Which is why the music feels like a constantly reshuffling deck of cards. The pattern might repeat, but the precise placement of sonic elements never lands in the same place twice.
This hypercomplexity is the new aesthetic.
And this brings us to his current philosophical relationship with AI composition, which is arguably the most fascinating, future-facing development in his career.
Right, he does not view AI as just a technology to automate or replace human composition.
Quite the opposite.
He sees it as a powerful device to expand human perception. It's a tool for externalizing and analyzing our own cognitive limits. AI can execute rhythmic ideas that are mathematically sound, but perceptually impossible for a human to really track or feel.
So by listening to those structures, we are forced to evolve how we hear.
Exactly. And here's the profound paradox that ties all his work together, from the 303 to the algorithms. His recent work is explicitly an attempt to make AI learn and internalize human error.
Not just a wrong note.
No, not just a musical error. It's about the inherent irrationality, the rhythmic hesitation, the slight emotional bias, the deliberate imperfection that defines us. Think about a human drummer versus a programmed beat. The human is always slightly behind or ahead of the click.
He's teaching the machine our flaws.
By doing that, he is trying to define, in sound, what makes us us. He's securing the human element in the machine's training data.
That's an amazing concept. He's using machines to define the boundaries of humanity.
Yes. So the music becomes a testing ground for something much bigger. Post-AI humanism. It's about securing the human signature, that unique texture of imperfection, in an increasingly automated creative world.
He's preparing for a world where AI composes everything.
And he wants to make sure that AI still carries the ghost of the machine's analog past, which is to say, the ghost of human involvement.
So if we contrast that 1992 benchmark Xtal with a modern track like Mini Pop 67 from 2014, the difference in technical specification is just staggering.
It is. We move from the cushioned analog soundscape of the 90s to something entirely different.
We shift from a softly focused soundscape to a geometric, crystalline, hyper-defined one.
The sound now has far higher granularity across all frequency ranges and infinitely more precise spatial information. You perceive instruments not just left to right, but front to back, above and below. The sound feels explicitly three-dimensional.
And our technical timeline shows a massive extension of the frequency range. Where early analog sat between 80 Hz and 8 kHz, his current range is huge. Sometimes from 30 Hz all the way up to the edge of human hearing at 20 kHz.
This is what we call full-range realization. It's achieved due to mature digital mastering, higher sample rates, and advanced analysis tools. And the result on the waveform is complex transients and incredibly dense high-frequency detail.
Can you define transients for our non-expert listeners?
A transient is that initial rapid surge of energy when a sound begins, like the sharp thwack of a drumstick hitting a snare.
Or the initial pluck of a string.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the old analog world, these sharp transients would be naturally rounded off, slightly blurred. In his current work, the transients are surgical. They hit you instantly and dissipate just as fast, giving the rhythm an almost painful clarity.
You hear sound particles in the high end that just weren't possible to capture in the early 90s.
And that technical transparency is necessary for you to fully perceive the sensation of data and the geometric nature of his current work.
So this brings us to the core synthesis of our deep dive. Tracing this journey across those four fundamental axes, by explicitly contrasting the early analog era with the current digital age, we can really define the genius that has allowed him to remain so vital for 3 decades.
And we can use our structured comparison to articulate this transformation. It's not random. It's a deliberate philosophical reversal of his own process.
Okay, let's start with technology. What defined the sound palette?
Early on, 1990 to 95, he relied on classic analog gear focused on aggressive cutting and pasting. The TB303, the S950, it was hands-on, physical.
And today?
Today, 2014 to 2025, he uses complex modular synths like Eurorack systems, sophisticated digital algorithms like Max MSP, and hybrid control systems that treat sound like pure data to be manipulated.
Next up, sound quality. How did the texture itself change?
Early sound was organic, accidental, and physical. It was defined by material limitations, like tape hiss and low-bit sampling.
Whereas current sound is
Geometrical, informational, and transparent, defined by data precision and high-definition clarity.
the shift in aesthetics is maybe the most telling philosophical change.
The early aesthetic was the coexistence of noise and rhythm. It was about embracing distortion and the internal sound of the machine. The current aesthetic is the coexistence of data and emotion, using computational structure as the vehicle to carry human feeling. He's reversed the focus.
And the expressive subject changes too, right? Reflecting his focus on that human-machine boundary.
Yeah, the early Aphex Twin explored the individual's interiority. It often reflected raw bodily feelings, anxiety, paranoia, distorted nostalgia.
Current work.
It explicitly explores the boundary between human and machine. It's asking questions about consciousness through sound.
And finally, the context. He emerged during the rave and IDM dawn, a moment of explosive electronic freedom.
Whereas his current work operates within the AI and algorithmic culture maturity, constantly pushing against modern digital norms of streaming and automated categorization. He's deliberately out of step with how music is consumed today.
The rhythmic complexity of his current work, specifically the use of asymmetrical rhythms and the interference between odd and even beats, is often cited as the hallmark of this new era. It's hard to grasp intellectually.
It is. This is where understanding polyrhythms becomes crucial. He often layers two incompatible time signatures to create deliberate instability, forcing your ear to constantly recalculate the beat.
So imagine one drummer playing a standard, comfortable 44 beat.
The rhythm we all expect, the grounding pulse, right?
And then a second drummer comes in and plays 5 beats in the exact same amount of time, a 54 cycle, layered directly over that 44 grid.
The result isn't a mess, though it sounds initially chaotic. It's a rhythmic interference pattern that generates this continuous, almost non-repeating sense of perpetual imbalance.
So your brain tries to find the pattern, but is forced to accept that the floor is constantly shifting beneath your feet.
Precisely. That layering generates what we call an auditory sense of floating or instability. The complexity forces you into active listening.
And that structural complexity, combined with the incredibly detailed digital texture from his current sound profile.
Those surgical transients, the full frequency range.
That's the signature of the modern Aphex Twin sound. It keeps you intellectually and perceptually engaged at all times. You are never allowed to just settle into a predictable groove.
So despite all these dramatic shifts, from analog tape to AI sequencing, what's the irreducible core of Richard D. James? What's kept him so relevant and vital?
Our sources powerfully identify that core constant as his commitment to remaining a foreign object.
He has always maintained this critical, almost antagonistic distance from mainstream culture, even when his videos were playing on MTV.
He always leaves a margin or a void in the music, regardless of whether he's using analog distortion or algorithmic complexity.
And that void is his enduring gift. It's a political statement in sound. Regardless of the trends or the tech, his sound demands active interpretation from you.
That margin is precisely where the listener is given room to project their own emotions.
He consciously constructs an empty space within the computational structure. He ensures the human element, your confusion, your interpretation, your emotional response, is required to complete the piece. He provides the data, you provide the feeling, the music becomes a mirror.
So what's the lasting legacy of this sustained exploration of the boundary between human and machine?
Aphex Twin fundamentally altered how electronic artists approach composition. He didn't just invent a genre, he invented a critical perspective. He influenced a whole cohort of subsequent artists.
We're talking about innovators like Burial, One-Otrix Point Never,
Autechre, Arca. They all share a common thread. They question the meaning generation of sound itself. They refuse to accept sound as just a vehicle for established genres or moods.
That's a profound point, especially today. I mean, in an age where music is pure data, where every track is tagged by mood and tempo, and streaming services like Spotify categorize and commodify every feeling, his whole body of work becomes a radical political act.
It does. He actively works to retrieve the human noise hidden within the data. His refusal to name songs, his hyper-complex rhythms, his insistence on showing the technical history, it's all a defiance of algorithmic categorization.
He prevents his work from being easily sorted and consumed.
He's become, in the truest sense, a sculptor of perception. And his critical conclusion is powerful. It defines his current mission. His music today is less about composition and more about the listener's interaction with the sound's raw existence.
He summarized this perfectly with that incredible quote that just encapsulates the entire journey. I am not making music. I am making the act of listening itself.
He forces you to confront the sound, not the story. So to summarize the entire philosophical arc of his work over the last 3 decades, his early period, fueled by analog gear and glorious human error, was essentially the electrification of emotion. He took raw inner human feeling and rendered it in electronic sound.
And his current output, built on advanced algorithms and data transparency, is the deliberate reversal of that.
It's the emotionalization of the electronic.
His entire journey has been this profound philosophical event. It's charting the ever-changing territory where human feeling meets machine perception. It feels less like a discography and more like a massive evolving body of experimental evidence about consciousness itself.
His sustained exploration of that boundary between the organic and the computational. It often feels like it's actively foreshadowing a near future where music itself might possess consciousness, or at least a highly advanced form of sentience capable of generating emotion independent of us.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought, which is rooted in everything we just analyzed. If Aphex Twin's current project is specifically designed to make AI learn and internalize human error, our beautiful flaws, the rhythmic imperfections, the emotional biases, what happens when the AI actually masters that error?
If the machine learns the full spectrum of our irrationality and imperfection and that boundary between human and machine finally collapses.
What new, maybe terrifying and incredible emotional territory will that hybrid creation unlock next?